Hey everyone, Emily here and welcome to my kitchen. It's a rainy morning here, so that means it's perfect for baking, and I thought I would throw together one of my favorite breakfast pastries to make. That's homemade Pop-Tarts. These are way better than anything you're gonna get at the grocery store and surprisingly very easy to put together. I'll show you how to make these in just a few steps. Let's get started. The first step to this is to make your pie crust. Now, if you want to, you can totally skip this step and just buy a refrigerated crust, and you can skip ahead to the filling in the timestamps down below. However, it is super easy to make your own crust, and I'm actually going to do it in the food processor. This cuts down on a lot of the work. So let's get started here by adding in 2 cups of flour. I'll just scoop the flour into my measuring cup. It's important that you don't scoop directly into the bag. That's going to make the flour too compact. You can wind up adding too much. So scoop it right in. And then when you have a little bit of a mound on top, you can go ahead and just level that off and dump the excess back into your flour container. So I'll add 1 cup to my food processor and the 2nd cup. Now I'm going to add in 2/3 cup of very cold butter. It's important that when you're making pie crusts or just pastries in general, all your ingredients be very cold. You don't want to turn this into a paste. You want it to be a bit of a crumbly mixture, and that's how it's going to be so flaky when it comes out of the oven. So I'll slice my butter directly into my flour. I'll add in about a teaspoon of salt and then about 8 tablespoons of ice water. I'm going to start with about 6 tablespoons, pulse this, and then you can add some additional water as you go. All right, I'll pop this onto my blender and secure the lid and start pulsing this. This takes a little bit of patience, but just keep pulsing until it turns from a crumbly texture and into a ball of dough. You can always add just a little bit more water as needed, but you don't want to add too much or you're going to come out with a really tough dough. You can see how this has come together into a dough. I'm just going to turn this out onto my countertop and we can get started rolling this out. I have a piece of parchment paper laid out over my countertop. I've lightly dusted this with flour. You can do this directly on your countertop, but I think this just makes for a bit of an easier cleanup and also makes it easier to lift the dough. So I'm going to take my dough from my food processor and put this directly onto the parchment paper. I'll form this into a ball. Can see where I still have some chunks of butter in there. That's what's going to make this so flaky when it comes out. Now we'll get ready to roll it out. I'll lightly dust my rolling pin with flour. That'll keep the dough from sticking to the rolling pin. And then I'll roll this out into a rectangle. Now for reference, we did make enough dough for a double pie crust. So this is going to make a very large rectangle. And if you're using a store-bought crust, you'll go ahead and use 2 crusts if you want to make this amount of Pop-Tarts. This looks perfect. I'm going to pop this onto a baking pan and slide it into the freezer for a few minutes to let it firm back up since we've been working with this for a little while. We want it to be very cold when we make our Pop-Tarts. Now for the filling, you can really do whatever flavor you want. You can throw in your favorite jam or jelly, you can put in some Nutella, whatever you want to do, but my favorite flavor happens to be the brown sugar cinnamon one, so that's what we're going to be throwing together. I have in this little bowl here, 1/2 cup of brown sugar. To this, we're going to add in a couple tablespoons of flour, and a teaspoon of cinnamon. Give that a mix to combine, and that's all there is to it. I'm gonna set this aside and take my pie crust out of the freezer. We're ready to put these together. I'm gonna start by slicing off the rough edges so I have a nice clean rectangle. Now we'll take my rectangle and slice it in half vertically, and then I'll make several shorter cuts across. Now I've brought over my parchment lined baking sheet and I'll place half of these squares onto the parchment paper. The remaining halves are going to be the tops of my Pop-Tarts. Onto this, I'm going to spoon a generous amount of my filling. Place that right in the center. Leaving a little space around the edges. Now I'm going to place the remaining pastry squares on top. And then you'll seal these by crimping the edges with a fork. If you want these to look extra nice, you can add in an egg wash. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Have a little water in this bowl here. I'll crack in 1 egg, and then give it a little whisk. Then you'll take a pastry brush and just brush that lightly onto each pastry. This is going to give it a nice glossy golden brown finish when it comes out of the oven. It's going to look so nice. These are all ready for the oven. I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees. I'm going to start these off at 20 minutes, but they'll likely wind up right around 25. Just wait until everything's golden brown and looks very cooked through. The timer just went off and these are looking amazing. They were in for about 28 minutes and they're nice and golden brown. The crust looks flaky. While these cool off, I'm going to work on the glaze. This is just a powdered sugar glaze, and honestly, I never really measure. I'll do my best to put some measurements in the recipe down below, but you'll go ahead and just to add some powdered sugar to a bowl, I don't know, maybe about 2/3 cup. We're gonna add in a couple shakes of cinnamon for this, but you can leave that out if you're not making the brown sugar cinnamon, or if you don't want it to have a cinnamon flavor, just a touch. We'll add in a splash of vanilla, maybe about a ½ teaspoon, and then very slowly we're gonna add a little bit of water. I have a bit of water here in this measuring cup, and just little by little, we're gonna add in some water. This isn't gonna take much, and you don't want it to be too runny. So mix this together. I would say it's just maybe a little bit too much on the runny side, and it's such an easy fix. You just add in a little bit more powdered sugar. This is about the consistency that you want. It's still going to be fairly thin, but enough that you can tell it's not going to just run right off of the pastries. We have to wait for these to cool almost completely before we can frost them, or the glaze is just gonna melt right off. So we'll give these about 10 minutes to cool off, and then we'll get started on frosting. These have had some time to cool off, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started frosting them. I'll take my glaze and give each one a light coating. You can add as much as you want, and if you'd like a thicker glaze, just add in a little bit more powdered sugar. Let's take one of these and break it in half, and you can see just how flaky that pastry is. Looks so good. All right, let's give one of these a try. So good. These are hands down so much better than store-bought Pop-Tarts. I don't know about you, but the crust on Pop-Tarts is always my least favorite part. And on these, especially when you make your own homemade crust, it's just so much better. These are super simple, and if you do skip making your own crust and buy some pre-made crust, these can be done in just a few minutes. I think totally worth making the swap to homemade versus store-bought here. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you can get notified every time I post. If you try this recipe, let me know how you like it in the comments section down below, and you can always find the full recipe in the description box. You can also find links to all my social media pages there and my Amazon page where you can find all my cooking favorites. Hope to see you back here next time.